When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had struck gold. The houses were clean, the lawns manicured, the streets lined with trees that glowed orange and red in the fall. It seemed like the perfect community, safe, quiet, and welcoming. At least, that's what the realtor told me. What I didn't know was that beneath that picture-perfect surface lay an HOA run by people who thought they were royalty, with one queen bee in particular, Karen. Now, Karen wasn't just any ordinary neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of the HOA's image. She strutted around like she owned every square inch of the subdivision, even though her property line ended just like everyone else's. You couldn't so much as park a car in your own driveway for too long without Karen scribbling down a complaint. And heaven forbid your trash can sat at the curb for an extra half hour after pickup. To her, those were violations that threatened the very fabric of the neighborhood. But as bad as Karen was, her daughter made her look like a saint. If Karen thought she was above the rules, her teenage daughter believed she was untouchable. Spoiled to the core, the girl had a reputation around the neighborhood. She'd cut across people's yards, scream at kids at the park, and throw tantrums if anyone dared to tell her no. People said Karen gave her whatever she wanted, new clothes, gadgets, even a brand new car for her 16th birthday, yet nothing seemed to satisfy her. For the most part, I tried to ignore the drama. I had my own life, my own work, and my own hobbies to keep me busy. One of those hobbies was my pride and joy, my ATV. I had saved up for months to buy it, and I spent even more time fine-tuning and maintaining it. On weekends, I'd take it out into the woods, roaring down trails and feeling the rush of freedom that only the open outdoors could give. The ATV wasn't just a toy, it was an investment, a machine I respected and cared for. I kept it locked in my garage, covered and well-maintained. Every time I rode it, I made sure it was cleaned and checked. To me, it represented hard work and well-earned enjoyment. Unfortunately, in a neighborhood like mine, anything nice you owned was like putting a target on your back. And as much as I tried to keep to myself, it wasn't long before Karen's daughter noticed the ATV. It started innocently enough, her hanging around the edge of my driveway when I had it out, asking questions in that smug, entitled tone. "Is that yours?" she'd ask, twirling her hair. "Yes," I'd reply, keeping my answers short. "Cool. My mom says people like you shouldn't have toys like that unless you're willing to share. We live in a community, you know." I brushed it off, thinking it was just teenage arrogance. But the way she looked at my ATV made me uneasy. It was the same way a crow eyes something shiny, like she wanted it for herself, and nothing would stop her from getting it. The tension simmered for weeks. She'd make little comments when she saw me unloading gear after a ride. Once, she even had the nerve to tell me that her mom thought the ATV was too loud and disruptive, and that maybe the HOA would need to step in if I kept using it. I laughed it off, but I kept my guard up. What I didn't realize then was that the girl's entitlement wasn't just words. It was a warning of what was to come. She was already plotting, already telling herself that she was untouchable, that no one in this neighborhood could stand in her way. And when the day finally came, when she crossed that line and took what didn't belong to her, she wasn't ready for the consequences that followed. Because you see, when someone like her thinks they're above the rules, they eventually learn the hard way that reality doesn't care how spoiled you are. The morning it happened felt like any other. The sun was barely creeping over the rooftops, and I was sipping coffee on my porch, planning out my weekend. I had left the garage closed the night before, same as always. My ATV was locked up, chained and covered. I was careful, maybe even paranoid, about keeping it safe. But paranoia doesn't stop entitlement. At first, I didn't even realize it was gone. Around mid-morning, I heard a loud, familiar roar echoing from the street. For a second, I thought maybe one of my riding buddies had stopped by unexpectedly. But as the sound grew louder, my stomach sank. That wasn't a buddy. That was my ATV. I rushed to the driveway, and sure enough, there it was, my prized machine, tearing down the street like it was in a race. And riding it, Karen's daughter. Her long blonde hair whipped behind her as she laughed, speeding down the asphalt like she owned the road. She wasn't wearing a helmet, had no protective gear, and worse, she looked like she had no idea how to actually control the thing. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted, even though she was already blocks away. I bolted to my garage, and my heart sank deeper. The lock on the side door had been busted, the chain I used on the ATV was lying on the floor, snapped. She hadn't just borrowed it, she broke in and stole it. Neighbors started to come out of their houses, drawn by the noise. Some looked concerned, others looked entertained, like this was just another HOA soap opera. I could hear whispers. "Is that Karen's daughter? Where'd she get that thing? Isn't that his ATV?" I stormed over to Karen's house, and as if on cue, she came strutting out in her robe, coffee cup in hand, smirking like she was queen of the block. "Good morning," she called out, completely ignoring the fact that her daughter was joyriding on stolen property. "Karen," I snapped, "your daughter just stole my ATV. She broke into my garage, destroyed my lock, and took off with it. She could get hurt, or worse, kill somebody." Karen didn't even flinch. She sipped her coffee and said, "Oh, relax. She's just borrowing it for a little fun. She deserves it, she's been working so hard at school lately. Besides, we're neighbors. Sharing is part of being in a community." I couldn't believe my ears. Borrowing? That's theft. She broke in and damaged my property. I'm calling the cops. That's when Karen's fake smile disappeared. She set down her mug, put her hands on her hips, and sneered. "You wouldn't dare. Do you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. My daughter is underage. She can't be held accountable for something silly like this. And if you push it, trust me, we'll make your life here miserable. You'll be buried in violations, so fast you won't have time to breathe." The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. She really thought she was untouchable. And worse, she had passed that same belief down to her daughter. Before I could even argue, the ATV came screeching back into view. The daughter whipped it around the corner, nearly tipping it, and skidded to a stop right in the middle of the street. She hopped off like it was nothing, tossing her hair back with that same smug grin her mother wore. "This thing is sick," she shouted, patting the handlebars. "I'm keeping it." I blinked, thinking maybe I had misheard her. "You're what?" She crossed her arms and smirked. "I said I'm keeping it. You've had it long enough. My mom says you don't need something like this." "I do. And if you don't like it, too bad. What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" "They won't do anything to me. I'm untouchable." The neighbors gasped. Some even pulled out their phones, clearly recording. The arrogance dripping from her voice was unbelievable. I turned back to Karen, waiting for her to at least correct her daughter, but instead she clapped like it was a performance. "That's my girl," she cheered. "She knows what she wants, and she goes for it. You could learn a thing or two from her." That was the breaking point. "You're both insane," I growled. "That's my property, and I don't care what kind of power trip you're on, you're not above the law. This ends now." Karen laughed in my face. "Good luck with that. But here's the thing, entitlement has a way of crashing down when reality finally steps in. And that crash was coming for them faster than they could imagine. Because while they thought they were untouchable, I was already dialing the police. And this time, the law wasn't going to side with their arrogance. The police arrived faster than I expected. Maybe one of the neighbors had already called them after seeing the ATV fly down the street. Or maybe the dispatcher just knew a stolen vehicle wasn't something to delay. Either way, within minutes, 2 squad cars rolled into the neighborhood, their lights flashing and sirens briefly blaring before cutting off. The moment the first car stopped, Karen rushed forward like she was the victim, waving her arms dramatically. "Officers! Officers!" she cried, pointing at me. "This man is harassing my daughter. He's trying to take away something that belongs to her." I nearly choked. "What?" I shouted. "That ATV is mine. She broke into my garage and stole it." The 2 officers exchanged a look, one of those quick glances that said, "Here we go again." Clearly, they were used to dramatic neighborhood disputes, but stolen property wasn't just a squabble. The taller officer stepped forward. "All right, let's slow down. Sir, can you explain what happened?" I took a deep breath and laid it all out. How I kept my ATV secured, how the lock was broken, how I heard it start up and saw Karen's daughter riding it down the street like a maniac. I pointed to the broken chain still sitting in my garage, the busted side door, and the neighbors who had watched the whole thing unfold. Meanwhile, Karen stood there scoffing, muttering under her breath, "Ridiculous. He's just jealous." When I finished, the shorter officer turned to Karen. Is this true? Did your daughter take the ATV without permission?" Karen crossed her arms and jutted out her chin. "Excuse me. Without permission? This is a community. We share here. And besides, my daughter deserves nice things. That machine was just sitting there, collecting dust. She's young, she should be allowed to enjoy it." The officer's jaw tightened. That's not how property works. That ATV doesn't belong to her. It belongs to him." Before Karen could fire back, her daughter jumped in. "Actually, it belongs to me now. Finders keepers. You can't arrest me. I'm underage, and my mom says the HOA runs everything here. That means we make the rules." The officer's expressions went from patient to stone cold in seconds. The taller one asked firmly, "Miss, did you break into his garage and take the ATV?" The girl shrugged, smirking. "Yeah, so what? He wasn't using it. And even if I did, you can't do anything. I'm untouchable." The silence that followed was deafening. Neighbors who had been whispering now audibly gasped. Someone even laughed under their breath. The officer slowly pulled out his notepad. "All right, I need to be very clear with you. You just admitted to breaking into private property and stealing a motor vehicle. That is grand theft auto. It doesn't matter that you're underage, you can still be charged." The daughter's smug expression faltered for the first time. "Wait, what?" Karen immediately lunged forward, screeching, "Don't you dare talk to her like that. She's a child. She can't be punished for something so small." "Small?" I cut in. "She destroyed my lock, broke into my garage, and stole something worth thousands of dollars. That's not small, Karen. That's a felony." The officers nodded. "He's right, This is serious." But Karen wasn't backing down. She jabbed a finger at the officer's chest. "Listen to me. I'm on the HOA board. If you think you can march in here and threaten my daughter, you'll regret it. We know people. Important people. You'll be writing parking tickets for the rest of your career if you don't back off." The officer didn't flinch. He simply stepped aside and gestured to his partner. "Cuff her." The daughter's eyes went wide. "Wait, what? You can't do that. Mom. Karen shrieked. "Don't you dare put your hands on my baby. She's innocent. This whole thing is a setup. He probably planted that ATV here to frame her." The neighbors burst into murmurs again, many of them outright laughing at the ridiculousness of it. A few even cheered quietly as the officers moved in. The shorter officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs and took the girl gently by the arm. "You have the right to remain silent." The girl screamed. "Mom. Do something. You said they couldn't touch me." Karen was hysterical, running around the officers, waving her arms, shouting threats, and demanding they stop. But the officers ignored her. And in that moment, the illusion of being untouchable shattered. The daughter, once smug and arrogant, was now panicking as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to wriggle free. "No, no, no. This isn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong." The taller officer looked her dead in the eye. "You did plenty wrong. And now you're going to learn actions have consequences." As they led her toward the squad car, Karen tried to block their path, but two neighbors stepped in. People who had been silent for months finally stood up, telling Karen she was out of line, that her daughter had gone too far this time. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, I realized something. I wasn't alone in this fight. And Karen was about to discover that her so-called power meant nothing when the law came knocking. The sound of the squad car door slamming shut echoed through the neighborhood like a gavel hitting wood. Karen's daughter sat inside, cuffed, still crying and shouting that it wasn't fair. Her voice was muffled through the glass, but every neighbor within earshot had already heard her declare herself untouchable minutes before. Now, those same neighbors whispered to each other, recording videos, shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen, on the other hand, completely lost control. She ran up to the squad car, pounding on the window. "You can't do this to her. She's just a child. She didn't mean it. She's innocent." The officer calmly but firmly stepped between her and the car. Step back. She's under arrest." Karen screamed in his face. "This is harassment. This is an abuse of power. I'll have your badge for this." The taller officer stayed cool. If you don't step back, you'll be facing charges too." For a second, I actually thought she might get herself arrested right there. But then she saw the neighbors, her audience, watching her unravel. She froze, straightened her robe, and tried to compose herself, but the mask had already slipped. The queen of the HOA had been exposed, screaming and powerless, while her daughter was hauled away in handcuffs. The officers took my statement in detail. I showed them the broken lock, the chain, and even provided receipts for the ATV to prove ownership. Several neighbors stepped forward too, offering to give testimony. Some admitted they'd been too afraid to speak out against Karen before, worried she'd make their lives miserable with constant HOA harassment. But seeing her daughter commit a crime in broad daylight gave them the courage to finally stand up. One older neighbor, Mr. Henderson, chuckled as he handed his phone to the officer. "Got the whole thing on video. From when she rode it down the street to when she admitted she was untouchable. Should be pretty clear evidence." Karen turned on him like a viper. "How dare you? After everything I've done for this community, this is how you repay me." But Henderson didn't back down. "What you've done, Karen, is terrorize this community. And now the truth's out." The officers finished their reports and prepared to drive off with her daughter. Karen made one last desperate attempt, yelling at the top of her lungs. "You'll all regret this. I'll have the HOA shut down your barbecues, your parties, your Christmas lights, everything. You think this is over?" But her threats rang hollow. The neighbors weren't scared anymore. Some laughed. Others walked away, shaking their heads. And for once, Karen stood alone, powerless. The fallout. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Neighbors posted the videos online, and it didn't take long for local news outlets to pick it up. HOA board member's daughter arrested for ATV theft made headlines, and the footage of the girl smugly declaring she was untouchable went viral. The HOA board scrambled to do damage control. At the next meeting, residents demanded Karen's removal. Even her fellow board members, who had once enabled her power trips, turned on her to save themselves. Within 2 weeks, she was forced to step down. Her daughter, meanwhile, faced juvenile charges. The court didn't go easy on her. Breaking and entering, property damage, and vehicle theft weren't things a judge could just shrug off. While she didn't end up in prison, she was sentenced to probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The smug attitude she once flaunted vanished quickly when she realized her actions had real consequences. And Karen? She sulked. She tried to spin the narrative, claiming her daughter was targeted, and that the neighborhood had conspired against them. But nobody bought it anymore. She had burned every bridge. My life after. As for me, I got my ATV back, a little scratched up, but still running. I reinforced my garage with better locks and cameras, just in case. But honestly, I didn't worry as much anymore. The neighborhood had changed. Where once everyone tiptoed around Karen and her daughter, now people were friendlier, more relaxed. We held block parties without worrying about Karen filing complaints. Kids rode their bikes without being screamed at for ruining the grass. For the first time since moving in, it actually felt like a community worth living in. One evening, as I polished up the ATV after a ride, Mr. Henderson strolled by and grinned. "Looks like the Queen lost her crown, huh?" I laughed. "Yeah. Turns out being untouchable doesn't protect you from handcuffs. And that's the truth of it. Entitlement only lasts until reality shows up. No matter how spoiled, no matter how protected someone thinks they are, eventually actions catch up with them." Karen's daughter learned that lesson the hard way, behind the locked doors of a squad car, with the whole neighborhood watching. Epilogue. Sometimes people ask me if I regret calling the cops, if maybe I should have let it slide, since she was just a kid. My answer is always the same. No. Because if I had let it slide, she would have kept doing it. Maybe not to me, but to someone else. And next time, it could have been worse. In the end, standing up to entitlement isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting the whole community. And that's why, to this day, every time I hear the engine of my ATV rumble to life, I can't help but smile. Because that sound isn't just freedom, it's justice served.